After further review, I am Ben Axelrod filling in for Dave DiNatale this week. With me, as always, is Jay Crawford. And Jay, just before we came on air here, I was thinking about the last time I did one of these shows with you. It was actually after week one. I joined you and Dino after week one. And suffice to say, our conversation back then probably went a little bit different than it's going to go today. What a year this has been. The Cleveland Browns, after their 41-35 win over the Tennessee Titans, now sitting at 9-3, in pole position to make the playoffs for the first time since 2002, have clinched their first winning season since 2007. And Jay, we'll get into the nitty gritty here of the Browns win over the Titans. But as we just take that big picture look at how far this team has come since week one, it would be pretty tough to explain to somebody who only watched the Browns after week one how they got to this point at 9-3.
Yeah, especially after week one when we talked, you're right. So the Browns are 9-2 since then. And, you know, a lot of the discussion, Ben, since the two bad losses to the Steelers has been centered around the fact that the Browns were piling up wins against really bad football teams. And while that's still true, they now have two signature wins that they can point to in the victory over the Colts and the victory yesterday over the Titans. Clean sweep of the AFC South, which is pretty impressive. And, you know, I mean, a lot of these wins have really followed the same formula. The Browns get out to a lead, in some cases a comfortable lead, and then have to hold on for dear life to make sure that they get the W. One of the things that I wrote in my column this morning for WKYC.com that I feel pretty strongly about, you're not old enough to remember this, but in 1979, when the cardiac kid Cleveland Browns were marching their way to the playoffs, their formula then was to look like crap for 3.5 quarters and then to somehow pull the rabbit victory out of the defeat hat and really kind of steal victory at the end of the game. So as you were watching those games, and I was barely a teenager, but as I was watching those games, I remember I was miserable for 3.5 quarters and then off my seat, jumping in the air for the last 5 minutes. This is completely different. Yesterday's game was almost a carbon copy of the Cowboys game. You play basically a perfect first half. You score every time you touch the ball. A franchise record 38 points. You kick a field goal on your first possession and you follow that up with 5 straight touchdowns. And then at halftime, it's as if the teams switched uniforms. The Titans come out, a 1:08 touchdown. Browns get it, holding penalty, 1st and 20, 3 and out. Titans get it, 2 minutes, length of the field, 14-0 before you blink. And it's really mystifying how a team can look so dominant in the first half, can look so bad in the second half. And that's what we've had this year. So I really think that as we've kind of learned this year, the Browns have learned how to win and how to hold on in close games. The next lesson that they have to learn is how to close out, how to finish the deal. Now, yeah, they've won these games, and in their losses, they were losses. You know, they were losses from the opening kick, essentially. The Raiders game was somewhat competitive, but you just got the feeling it was going to be an L from jump. Ravens and Steelers, off the bus losses. So what they have to do now is they have to prove that they can come from a deficit. They have to be down 14-6 and win 21-17. They have to prove that they can put together a good second half. I hate to throw these numbers out because they're kind of number soup, but I found them to be so stark that they're worth sharing because I think they tell a very defining tale. The Browns in the first half of football games have outscored their opponents 180 to 135. Pretty impressive. In the second half of football games this year, they've been outscored 186 to 125, somewhere in there. Don't have the exact numbers. But even more troubling, Ben, and I don't know that I've ever seen a 9-3 football team exhibit the following stat, which I'm going to share. The Browns are being outscored on the season 306 to 321. Almost impossible to do when you have 9 victories and only 3 losses. So they're getting pounded in the second half of football games. And to give you a comparative, the Browns are being outscored by 15 points in their 9 games, or in their 12 games. They're 9-3. The Dolphins are 8-4, and they've outscored their opponents by more than 90 points collectively. That's what you'd expect to see from a team that's 8-4 or 9-3. So the fact that the Browns are 9-3 and being outscored by 15 points with the easiest schedule in the NFL is concerning for another day. You know, I mean, on this day, we can celebrate a win against a quality team. But, you know, if you're like me and you're just waiting for that other shoe to drop, that's where I am right now. I can't understand how we've been outscored on the season by 15 points.
Yeah, and you know, some of that is skewed obviously by the 2 blowout losses, but
sure,
of the 9 wins, I believe they have 7 one-score wins now, which is like a crazy number just in terms of, I was talking with some buddies last night, you know, when you do the look ahead now to 2021, the big indicator that everybody looks at for which team is going to fall off is usually one-score wins and then turnover differential, because there's a lot of belief that there's a lot of luck that goes into turnovers, and that's not.
It's tough to duplicate year after year.
Absolutely. And the Browns obviously are faring very well in both of those categories this year. So you would expect some sort of regression to the mean either later this season or next year. But I will say this, you know, of those 7 one-score wins, really like that second win over the Bengals was the only one where it felt like they were teetering in terms of, you know, about to lose that game. Yesterday, I think there was, you know, some fluky stuff with the Baker Mayfield fumble. The Cowboys, I mean, it almost seemed like they almost get up too big for their own good, and they're just able to coast throughout the second half. I'm with you. I thought yesterday was almost a carbon copy of that win over the Cowboys in week 4. You know, the flip side of that, though, is if the Titans then recover that onside kick and you're dealing with having to cover Corey Davis and A.J. Brown down the field for a couple more plays, that game could look a lot differently. But yeah, you know, on the one hand, I think, you know, the Browns are winning these games, and even if they are by 1 score, I think it's not necessarily fully indicative of how those games have gone. On the other hand, I watch a team like even the Patriots yesterday just put away the Chargers from start to finish and think, why can't the Browns do that? And I think you're onto something that's the next step. If you look at this season as a work in progress as far as learning how to win, I think that's absolutely the next step, is just how do they learn to keep their foot on the gas for an entire 60-minute game here.
Yeah, that is the next step in the evolution of the Cleveland Browns for sure. I want to take a second right now to give credit where it's most due for where we are. And that's always tough, because if you're going to start assigning credit and blame, you have to understand that pie is very big and there's going to be a lot of slices out of it. And so I preface my remarks by pointing that out. And I understand that this is clearly a group and an organizational effort. And GM Barry has a lot to do with the success, and on the field, Myles Garrett, Baker Mayfield, all of that. But I think, to me, it's pretty clear that the elixir in all of this, the straw, if you will, that's stirring this 9-3 drink, is Kevin Stefanski. And it'd be really tough to argue that at any length. Now, that may mean that he has 11% credit, and Andrew Berry has 7, and Baker Mayfield has 9, and you know. But I think if you're slicing that credit pie out, I think the biggest piece has to go to Stefanski, because what he has done in 12 short weeks of football is wash 2 decades of filthy, rotten stench off of an organization. And the one thing that we know about any organization, particularly the Browns, is those moving parts are moving. They come, they go, and the team this year will look markedly different than what it looked last year, and next year will look markedly different than this year. That's just the nature of the NFL. But last year we had a lot of really good moving parts in the machine, a lot of really good moving parts. Many of the same moving parts we have right now. But the crankshaft to this whole machine has been Kevin Stefanski, who's come in here and instilled a culture of winning. He has changed the mindset. He's changed the skin of an organization. And that's the most difficult thing to do in any sport, Ben. You know that. Whether it's football, baseball, basketball, the difficult task that he has had is that many before him have fallen off the cliff and into the crevasse of failure trying to do that, while he's so far been able to stick his flag in the mountaintop. Because when you watch the Browns, this is the thing that really strikes me when I watch them. Last year I watched them and they were a self-defeating team. I always got the sense, even when they were winning, I always got the sense they can't close this deal. They don't know how to close this deal. Yes, I was nervous yesterday. I was nervous against Dallas. I've been nervous a lot this year. But so far, the sample size is small, but so far, their swagger is there. Their belief and their confidence, and that all comes from the top. It comes from Kevin Stefanski's calming influence that he's had. You'll never see this guy. He's not going to throw his clipboard and march up and down the sidelines. He's also not going to throw his arms up in the air after a second quarter touchdown. It's not that guy. That's the guy, in my belief, if you're creating a perfect head coach in the lab, that has to be burned into the coach's DNA. Not to say that emotional coaches can't be successful. John Gruden was, but what you usually see in those cases is there's a high burnout ratio. Because that rah-rah message only goes so long, and year to year it starts to become deafening and it's white noise. Where guys like Belichick through the years, Andy Reid, though he hasn't had that ultimate long sustained Super Bowl success, Andy's a guy who is, his emotions are all tucked in his coat. And I think Stefanski's are too. And I think he's the guy right now, 12 games in. If I've got to give that biggest piece of pie, he's getting it.
Yeah, I cover these press conferences week to week, really day to day now. And his demeanor was the same after that week 1 loss to the Ravens that we just talked about, as it was yesterday when, they clinched a winning season and put themselves in the driver's seat for, really, pretty much a lock now to make the playoffs, I'd say. And that's, I think he's an incredible play caller. I think that he just, organizationally now there's a lot of cohesion within this organization that they haven't had. And I think a lot of that has flowed through Kevin Stefanski. But beyond that, I think you hit the nail on the head. Just his calming influence, really, covering these press conferences last year and years before that, you're always waiting for that quote. Who's going to say the thing that I'm going to write up and it's going to blow up and it's going to be the headline coming out. Now these press conferences are pretty boring. Like, they are functioning like a real NFL team. And I think a lot of that stems from, I mean that. I think that's one of the best things you can say about this Browns team is, like, they are functioning like a real NFL team. And that's not something we've seen here very often over the course of the last 20 years.
Ben, that's an astute point. I remember covering, this is how old I am. I covered the New England Patriots when Bill Parcells was their head coach. I was working in Hartford, Connecticut. And I remember thinking to myself, he ruled by intimidation. Okay, that was clear. Both his team and the media. That's how he ruled. And Belichick, obviously being, a high branch disciple of the Parcells tree, had a lot of those same instincts. I think was a little less iron-fisted with his players than Parcells was, and also with the media. His attack with the Parcells' approach with the media was to look you in the face and say, "That's a dumb question," and everybody in the room kind of was like, "Who's going to be next?" And that's how he had 4-question news conferences. Nobody wanted to get roasted by Bill Parcells. Belichick's tact is completely different. He lulls you to sleep with this boredom and tedious approach by telling you nothing therefore not creating internal scandals or, like you said, headlines that can be divisive, particularly in today's clickbait society. I don't think that Stefanski is ever going to be that guy that gives the media that bombastic one-liner that divides his team. And that's brilliant. And it's by design. He's boring by design. Doesn't say a whole lot. Answers are short. Stops relatively early in his answer. I think all of those are really good things. And, you know, they always say players and teams take on the personality of their head coach. I'm sure you see a difference in Baker Mayfield in the way he handles his news conference now. Remember last year, he had a one-liner to Tony that spawned a T-shirt. And also it was divisive. You know, it even to fans were like, you know what? I love that. Other fans were like, shut up and play football. Those distractions aren't here this year. And I think in large part, it's because the head coach hasn't allowed them to be here. He's leading by example. Baker, I thought yesterday in his news conference, I thought it was genius. Somebody asked a question, you know, how are you different today than you were a month ago or last year? And his answer was vintage Office. But it was so good. It was like, well, before I do anything now, I think to myself, would an idiot do this? I mean, that's fantastic. And he's having fun with it. And my favorite part of the Kevin Stefanski regime is, and it's a little bit about like Belichick. You remember Belichick a couple of years ago when the obits were being written about the Patriots? He coined the famous one-liner onto Cincinnati because that was behind them. Good or bad, it's over. Can't replay it. It's like golf. You got to focus on your next shot because you can't re-hit your last shot. No mulligans in the NFL. Well, now Stefanski's sort of one-line mantra, if you're going to make a T-shirt, we're just trying to go 1-0. Mm-hmm. And it's worked. And the players have bought into it. And they're not, so far, it doesn't seem they're buying into the hype. And they're not reading their own clippings. The one thing that I'll say they have to get better on is finishing teams off. That's a good problem to have. That means you're in a position to have a nice lead in the third and fourth quarters. So get a little more aggressive. Here's what I would like to see. Play every possession on offense like you're down by 7 points and there's 3 minutes to go. And play every possession on defense like you're down by 7 and there's 3 minutes to go. If the scoreboard always reads +7 for the opponent, it changes your mindset. We've got to get it done. We have to get it done. And so I think they're getting there, man. They're getting there. I know this was a prove-it game. Mm-hmm. They're all prove-it games. Monday's going to be prove-it against the Ravens. Then you've got the Jets and Giants, who normally we would be like, okay, Giants are in first place, and that will be a very meaningful and important football game to the Colt McCoy-led Giants. What kind of alternative universe are we living in that Colt McCoy is taking a New York football team to the playoffs? That's where we are. Yeah. And then the Jets, who might be one of the best winless teams I've ever seen. You know, they if not for a dumb decision to not have deep help or even 2 safeties at the end of the game yesterday, they beat the Raiders. And so this is a football team that if you sleep on either one of those teams, you're coming back with a loss. So those are going to be prove-it games. And then, of course, the Steelers. My dream scenario, Ben, is the Steelers are 15-0, and we're 11-4, 12-3, and we spoil their perfect season with a Week 17 win. That's my hope, and we'll see if it comes to fruition.
Yeah, you talk about full circle from 2017 when it was the Steelers who beat the Browns to seal the Browns' 0-16 season. That would be quite the storybook finish to this regular season. But fortunately, we're going to have more football to play after that week as well. I want to go back to something you said about Baker Mayfield and just the difference in him this year. And I think it actually connects to what you've been harping on about this team finishing games. I think what we've seen this year between Kevin Stefanski and Baker Mayfield is kind of just a building of the trust where, you know, we've seen Baker go from being a game manager to now being a guy who, you know, they really let it fly yesterday in the first half. And I do wonder if now they're at a point where before they wanted to, just run the air out of the ball in the second half, just get that win, move on to the next week. I do wonder if, as they build this trust with Baker Mayfield in this offense, if now you are in a position where you can stay aggressive in the second half and really keep your foot on the gas here.
Again, Ben, that's a very astute point, something that I thought of yesterday at halftime. So as I'm watching this team, trying to figure out how is this football team that I've just watched for the last 30 minutes different from the football team that I watched against Baltimore and Pittsburgh earlier this year. And really, the thing that jumps off the screen at you is Baker Mayfield. So, yes, we've got this fantastic run game, which will come in handy during the playoffs for sure. But there was a play yesterday, the 75-yard touchdown to Peoples-Jones. If you go back and watch that play, I wish I had access to the post-game Zoom with Baker. I wanted to ask Baker specifically on that play, what was called in the huddle? Did you see something and change? And the reason I asked that is because Baker motioned for Peoples-Jones to come over to the right side, which he did. He came in motion. He had initially lined up on the left. The reason I bring all this up is this is one of the signs that the quarterback has matured into not just a thrower of the football, but a dissector of the defense. Mm-hmm. So they had one deep safety, and Peoples-Jones comes in motion, and Baker sees he's got man on the right side with no deep help. So I don't know what was called. I'd love to find out, but Peoples-Jones ends up running a stop and go. Well, that's what you would call when there's no deep help on that side of the field. You want, because you're one-on-one, if you beat that corner on the stop and go, it's a touchdown every time because there's no deep help to come over. So Baker gets just enough time from the offensive line, which was, again, just terrific in that first half. Again, slice of credit, a huge slice of credit goes to that unit, by far the most improved unit on this football team. Baker sees that on the stop and go, the corner bites the whole hook and then kind of slips in his recovery. Well, that's an easy 100 out of 100 touchdown. All you got to do at that point is loft it up, put enough air under it. It was a perfectly thrown ball. He doesn't break stride, catches it 75 yards. So the reason I want to know the genesis of that play, did Baker change into that, is because it tells you that the maturation step process is moving along nicely. He saw something that he probably saw in study throughout the week on film. He calls Peoples-Jones to get over on the right side because that's where the advantage is from a matchup standpoint, and he exploits it. And so it's little things like that. Everybody thinks that, the quarterback just throws the football. Well, 90% of the work is done in the film room and learning defenses' tendencies and finding their holes, being able to exploit them by changing the play into the proper call that will defeat that, whatever that defensive look is. And I was more excited about the actual process of that whole moment than I was about the actual result. The result was great, but bigger and more lasting and long-term is Baker's now playing chess, not checkers. And I think, to your point about the trust is what? There's a saying, trust is earned. He's gone 5 straight games, including 3 in absolute torrential rain, wind, horrible conditions. He's now gone 5 straight games without throwing an interception. 21 touchdowns now to 7 interceptions. That's much more of the ratio. Look, it's not, 32-4 or whatever ridiculous ratio Patrick Mahomes is, but it's a hell of a lot better than where he was in week 7. And you're starting to see now, if you're at a 3-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio, that's how you win football games. That's how you beat the good teams. So I think the way the schedule is played out last year, the schedule couldn't have been worse. We talked about that last year. They just got punched in the face out of the gate. And before they knew it, they needed a standing 8 count. The season was over. Well, this year it was flipped. Even though they lost game 1, much as they did last year, they were able to rebound because they had some easy cream puffs instead of New England Patriots and playoff teams. So they get a roll going and they get confidence. And now they're a better team. We've seen that. They're confident, and their 2 toughest games are still remaining out of their last 4. They're divisional foes that you haven't been able to beat historically. So, they're ready for the Ravens and the Steelers late in the season. They weren't early in the season. And we're really going to see more than anything else how this team has progressed from week 1 to week 13, and then to week 4 or whenever it was that we played the Steelers the first time, to week 17, 16, end of the season. And all indicators are if we may not win those games, but I do not believe they're going to do to us what they did the first time. The only thing, my big fear, is that Steelers defense. It's as good as it gets.
Yeah. I want to ask you how yesterday changed your view of this team in this season, because for me, you look at the schedule and they're beating the teams they're supposed to beat. They're eking out kind of these weather games that it's hard to make a judgment on Baker or really, I think those weather games actually kind of played into the way this team would prefer to play. But, to beat the Titans, you can pick apart their defense or whatever. They are a legitimate first place team. They're a team that was playing in the AFC title game a year ago. And, I'm pretty much about as skeptical as anyone usually. After yesterday, I'm kind of looking ahead and wondering if once the Browns get into the playoffs, if they're going to be able to maybe become that Titans team from a year ago that's able to run and make the plays it needs to make on defense and have a quarterback who makes the plays he needs to make. I think yesterday really went a long way toward changing at least my view of what the upside of this team could be moving forward.
Yeah, me too. I'm as skeptical as they get. I have 54 seasons under my belt.
Yeah.
I will say that I have referred to this season coming into yesterday as fool's gold. Yes, you are what your record says you are, but your record is a product of what your schedule has been. And I looked at that 8-3 and said, okay, of that 8-3, I believe we played 4 quality teams. 3 of them beat us, and we had beaten the Colts. So quality, if you're just going to pull games out of the schedule and you're just going to take those games that are against what you could consider teams that are in the playoff hunt right now, the Raiders, the Colts, the Steelers, and the Ravens. Those are all 4 of those in the playoff hunt. We're 1-3 against those teams. So my view of all of this yesterday was extreme fool's gold, and I don't even need to test it. I can look at it and I can see it doesn't have the shine and luster of the real stuff. But now I'm kind of reaching for my chemical kit, Ben. I want to put a couple drops of acid on that gold, and I want to see, is the shine coming off or is it still there? And that's what this Steelers game is going to be at the end of the season, and this Ravens game a week from tonight. We're going to be put to the test, because I'm a little more confused today than I was yesterday at this time. Yesterday, again, I thought, I'm not going to say that they're not a good team. I just thought 8-3, it's don't buy in because it's fool's gold. Now I'm not sure. I want to make sure, and we're going to find out. The Ravens are going to be those drops of acid that will either bubble our shell or make us shine. And we're going to find out. And that's what you want. You want these yardstick games. You want them every 3 or 4 weeks. You don't want them every week like we had 3 out of 4 last year to start the season, because that can get you back on your heels early. But I think where we are now is I'm tending to believe much more of what I see is real. But then there's a saying. I was having a conversation with Tony Dungy, and I said, after a particularly bad loss, and he didn't have many of those, I asked him, in the NFL, where you're only as good as your last game, where is this team? I can't remember who it was against and what the record was, but they too were It was in one of the years they were making an NFC championship run. Maybe they were 9-3, but they had a really bad sour loss. And I said, in this day and age where you're only as good as your last game, what does that say about this football team? And he said, the standard, I'm not thinking about that one. We're thinking about the next one. But he also said something that I thought was pretty prophetic and really can come into play with this Browns team. He said, Jay, it's not just you're only as good as your last game. In this world, in this day and age, you're only as good as your last half. And that really came flooding back to me last night as I'm thinking about all of this, because I don't want to be only as good as our last half. We lost 28-3 in our last half. I want to be as good as our second to last half when we won 38-7. So that's the dichotomy. That's the juxtaposition that I don't understand. How can you be 38-7 in one game, and the very next game you play that team and you're 28-3? That's inconsistent. That's inconsistency. And that's also the mark of a team that's not ready. That's the mark of a young and inexperienced team. I want to see 4 footballs of glorious execution. I want to see a game where we beat a team in the dirt for the first half and we beat the team in the dirt for the second half, whether that's against the Ravens or the Giants or the Jets or the Steelers. We've got to see that before we turn the calendar to January, because quite frankly, in the playoffs, you have to play every second of every minute of every quarter of every game. That's just the way it is. You know that. And think back to the Chiefs in the playoffs last year when they dug themselves this huge hole and were able to come back. Don't get up on the Chiefs 28-3. You're just inviting Patrick Mahomes to sling it all over the yard. And when the dust settles, it's going to be 35-31. So, you just, and that's all a learning process. And I do think Stefanski, I can't remember if it was Jimmy, because I listened to and watched the game. I can't remember if it was the TV crew or Jimmy that made this point. I think it was the TV guys. They had said, in talking to Kevin Stefanski, we brought up the Cowboys game from earlier this season, and he readily admitted, I probably got a little too conservative with my play calling, but we've learned from that. I can't remember if it was Jimmy that told that little anecdote or the TV guys. One way or another, shortly after hearing this story and thinking, good, they're aware of that. He's not going to, they're going 3-out punt, 3-out punt. Tennessee's going length of the field, touchdown, length of the field, touchdown. I'm thinking, well, what changed? We got the same players. Nobody's out. What changed? The mindset changed. The philosophy changed. We've got a 4-score lead. We've got a 3-score lead. We've got a 2-score lead. Keep your foot on the gas the whole 60 minutes. And if they didn't learn it in Dallas, they certainly had that message driven home again yesterday in Nashville, because these teams are going to play 60 minutes, whether it's Dallas or Tennessee or Pittsburgh. It doesn't matter. The Jets yesterday played 59 minutes and 50 seconds and they lost. So they know too, you got to run through the tape, and you don't want to be, I'm telling you, there's 3 teams you don't want to play right now. The Browns, the Patriots, or the Jets. Because if you play the Jets and you're that team that allows them to get over on you, and if it is the Browns, the headlines in every paper the morning after the Jets game, should they beat us, is don't believe it.
Right.
It fool's gold. So, man, that game's going to have a ton of pressure. And by the way, if you're Adam Gase, aren't you pretty much going for it on every 4th down? That makes it tough to win. Those teams that have nothing to lose can become oddly dangerous, particularly when there's talent. And the Jets clearly have talented players. They just haven't been able to, push the door down yet. My hope is they win before we come to town.
Well, they've got a couple of weeks to do that. Looking ahead to next week here, and then we'll get out of here. Monday Night Football, the Cleveland Browns riding a 4-game winning streak in pole position in the AFC wildcard race. Baltimore Ravens, meanwhile, could very well be on the ropes fighting for their playoff lives. I know we've all had moments throughout the course of the last 10 months or however long where we, yearned for that normalcy. But it's hard for me not to think about what First Energy Stadium would be like next week, what the Muni lot would be like with a primetime game of this magnitude.
Yeah.
Instead, I guess we'll have to settle for 12,000 fans. But it's hard for me not to think what this game would look like in the normal world.
Yeah, it's almost what's the right word? I don't want to be hyperbolic here. It's like, do we really deserve this punch now? I mean, we've taken so many right crosses to the chin over the last 20 years. It's just so us. And I hate to be woe is us, give us a pity party. That's why I hesitate to go there. But it's just so typically Cleveland that in the year where we finally have juice in First Energy Stadium, we all can't be there to enjoy it. All that said, I'd rather have it this way than be in the stadium and be 6-10. Mm-hmm. But it's just so very Cleveland and just such another right cross to our face that we find maniacs that enjoy that 3-hour hole on a Sunday more than any fan base in America, in my view. And I know what it means to this city. I know what it means to the fans individually and collectively. So to not be able to enjoy that and to celebrate that, just